Tonight, all the lights poured into Fairchild Hall, a grand, centuries-old mansion in the wealthy suburbs, where the crisp autumn air only made the silk cashmere shawls draped across elegant shoulders seem more refined. This was the Fairchild family's annual charity gala, an event coveted by financiers, artists, and media elites alike, each vying to see their name on the guest list. Across the great hall, white orchids and tall candles cast a soft glow against marble floors and Greek columns carved with precision. Laughter mingled with the clink of glasses, the rhythm of heels, and the soothing hum of strings, a symphony of wealth and power. But none of it was the centerpiece. At the heart of the hall stood a Steinway & Sons grand piano, an antique ebony treasure, its hand-carved golden details gleaming under the chandeliers. Borrowed from the National Museum of Instruments under strict conditions, it sat elevated on a mahogany platform, cordoned off by a circle of red velvet rope. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a symbol, a statement. We can even borrow history. In the corner, a black man in a janitor's uniform quietly pushed his cleaning cart down the corridor. His name was Elijah Thompson. In his 30s, he bore little that might catch attention except his eyes. Deep brown, steady, he moved silently, wiping spilled wine, collecting glasses, opening service doors. Few remembered his name. Most simply recalled, that black janitor keeps the place spotless. But tonight was different. As Elijah passed the piano, his gaze lingered. Not in curiosity, but in recognition. For a brief moment, he looked at it the way a man greets an old friend. He didn't cross the rope, didn't touch a key, but his eyes carried the memory of someone who had once coaxed sound from wood, who had once listened with his heart, not his ears. That glance did not escape Rowena Fairchild. The heiress of the family, 27, descended the marble staircase in a burgundy gown blazing like fire amid the gold-lit hall. Wait a second. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us. Tall, sculpted, with ice blue eyes, Rowena was both host and guardian of the prized piano. She herself had signed the preservation contract. Seeing Elijah's stillness, she arched a brow. "Hey, you there? The black janitor?" Staring at the piano. "Are you planning to do something with it?" Her voice wasn't loud, but sharp enough to draw attention. Then with a smirk, "If you can play something that impresses me, I'll marry you right here." Laughter erupted. A few guests choked on champagne. Wall Street men clapped mockingly. Society ladies tilted their heads, amused. A cruel joke, wrapped in silk and arrogance. Everyone expected Elijah to flush, bow, retreat. But he only nodded. Without a word, he slipped off his gloves, placed them neatly on the cart, and walked toward the piano. "What the hell is he doing?" a waiter muttered. "Oh God, stop him!" a young woman gasped. But Elijah kept walking. He bowed deeply to the piano, as though kneeling before a queen, then sat. Silence. Some chuckled, waiting for a ridiculous scene. But the instant his fingers touched the keys, the hall froze. Sound bloomed. Not Mozart, not Bach, but something haunting, tender, like water dripping on old wood, like a story spoken without words. Elijah did not flaunt technique. Each note carried memory. Every chord felt lived in. The room seemed to tighten, drawn into his breath, his pulse. Even Rowena, moments ago sneering, sat motionless, her gaze locked on the hands she had mocked. It felt as if even time had paused to listen. Then, clack, a sudden break, like a throat strangled mid-song. The piano fell silent. Elijah pressed again. Nothing. A guest rose in alarm. "What's happening?" Another shouted. "The piano's broken." Panic rippled. Organizers rushed in pale-faced. Whispers cut the air. "It's the museum's piano." Then a voice thundered. "Who's responsible?" Dozens of eyes turned, almost in unison, toward Elijah. The silence in the grand hall was no longer the silence of admiration, but a suffocating pause. The antique grand piano, symbol of the gala, of honor, of luxury, had just gone mute. One bass key no longer responded. Then another. The whole system seemed to choke. A middle-aged man in a black tuxedo, The museum's instrument inspector rushed forward, his face pale. He bent over the piano as if staring at a wounded body. Then, with undisguised horror, he exclaimed, "My God, if a bass string snapped or the action failed, that's no less than $3 million in damage." Every gaze turned sharply to Elijah, the black janitor still standing at the piano. His face showed no panic, no defense, only a flicker of bewilderment, as if the broken voice of the piano hurt him too. A woman whispered, "It must be him. He had no permission to touch the piano, and yet—" A heavy-set gentleman barked, "Who let him pass the rope? Who?" "Miss Rowena dared him to play," a trembling waiter admitted. Rowena clenched her glass, eyes locked on Elijah. She wanted to speak, but stayed silent. She wasn't sure anymore. Just moments ago, the sound he played was too strange, too true, not skill but soul. Yet now the piano was broken, and the last hands to touch it were his. The inspector's voice cut through. "Until the fault is confirmed, responsibility falls on the person who used the instrument without authorization." Murmurs rose. "Call the police! Guards, get him out!" Elijah didn't move. He didn't resist, didn't plead, as if he knew he had no right to speak. Among silk suits and million-dollar watches, he, the black janitor in a faded uniform, stood like an ink stain on marble. But who in that hall knew that Elijah's fingers had touched hundreds of keys before? Not in palaces, but in a run-down woodshop of the American South. As a child, Elijah lived with his grandfather Walter Thompson, an old piano repairer. Their small house sat in a poor black district, walls crumbling, tin roof rattling with every storm, but always filled with music. Walter never taught from books. He placed Elijah's hands on each wooden soundboard, taught him to hear with his palms, to sense a misaligned string from a faint vibration, to smell dampness in the wood through the wind. Elijah never studied theory, but he knew an old piano could tell stories longer than any symphony. "Pianos are like people," his grandfather used to say. "They have temperaments. They carry joys, sorrows, scars. Some things you mend, some things you simply live with." As a boy, Elijah was bullied for being black, for being poor, for failing math, but messing with pianos. Once kids cornered him, shoved torn notebooks into his mouth, shouting, "Trash like you should shut up and clean toilets." At home, Walter said nothing. He only handed the boy a broken keyboard and said, "Try. Maybe it can still be saved." And strangely, while fixing it, Elijah's shame quieted. His fingers on wood became his way of healing. At 15, Elijah lost Walter. The old man coughed himself blue one night. No money for the hospital. He left behind only his shop and notebooks. Elijah drifted, delivering papers, waiting tables, cleaning houses, repairing cars. But whenever someone brought him a piano, he worked with spotless hands. For children, he charged nothing. Once he even built a tiny wooden piano from scraps and gave it away. Life eventually brought him to Fairchild Mansion as a cleaner. He asked for nothing but steady pay and a roof that didn't leak. Yet every time he passed the music room, he paused for just a second, enough to make his chest tremble. And tonight, one fleeting chance to touch the grand piano had become the worst danger of his life. A lawyer at the gala declared bluntly, "If the damage is severe, this qualifies as destruction of national property. With his record, income, and status, Elijah cannot escape. 10 years in prison is possible." A guest muttered, "The Fairchild family will be dragged through the press. Worse than a scandal. Their reputation will be ruined." Someone else hissed, "Who let a black janitor wreck a national treasure?" Rowena stood frozen, her face paler than before. Was her careless jest destroying her family's legacy? And Elijah, now accused of ruining history, stood like a lone shadow before the court of eyes, swallowed in a painting of silver and gold. The atmosphere of the banquet shifted from grandeur to chaos in an instant. Curious glances turned into heavy suspicion, hanging in the hall like fog. The piano stood silent, as if insulted. Lady Rowena remained still, her face unreadable, anger or shock. 2 large men in black suits rushed forward, gripping the arms of the black man standing before the instrument. He did not struggle. He only turned his head gently, gazing at the piano as if apologizing to a dear friend. But as they dragged him, his low voice broke the silence. "Please, just give me a minute. I beg you. Let me open the piano and check." "Check? Who do you think you are?" a guest sneered. "No checking. What if you break it more?" another chimed in. Amid the noise, Rowena's voice cut sharp and clear. "Wait." The entire hall froze. The young woman in a velvet red gown, her gaze cold as winter, stepped closer to the piano. "You said you need to check?" Elijah nodded. "Just 1 minute. I can prove I'm innocent." A pause, then she nodded. 1 minute. Before anyone could object, he wrenched free of the guards, walked to the piano with the reverence of approaching a grave. He sat down, pulled a small cloth from his pocket, wiped the lid, then began unscrewing it piece by piece. Everyone held their breath. No laughter, no whispers now. In less than 2 minutes, the wooden cover slid open. Crystal light poured down, glittering on the taut metal strings like veins. He glanced once enough. "Here." He pressed a finger against a tiny piece of metal wedged beneath the damper system. "This doesn't belong to the piano." A shudder rippled through the crowd. He went on. "This piece jammed the damper at the exact moment I played. That's why the sound cut off. If no one opened it, when the piano returned to the museum, people would think it was poor maintenance. The Fairchild family's reputation would be ruined." Silence. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Rowena frowned, bent down to see the coin-sized, warped piece of metal. Then she turned sharply. "No one leaves. Lock down the entire hall." "But, miss," a manager stammered. "But I will not let my family's name be dragged through filth over a dirty trick." Her tone was ice. The weight of her command froze the room. Some guests looked around nervously, others whispered, and then a shout from the back. "Someone's climbing the fence." Guards stormed out. Guests followed like hunters chasing prey. A man was caught, thin, sweat dripping in the catering uniform of an unfamiliar restaurant. He trembled, avoiding their eyes. "I just had to leave, an emergency." "Who are you? What are you doing here?" a guard demanded. "I'm just staff. I'm not involved." But as he muttered, something fell from his pocket. A flathead screwdriver, the kind used specifically to adjust pianos. Gasps erupted. Rowena snatched it up, staring hard. The only one not surprised was the black man. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the tool as if meeting an old acquaintance. "This type, only one shop in the city sells it." Rowena spun back. "You know him?" "I don't know him, but I know this tool." The man's face drained of color. He stumbled back, tried to flee, but was thrown to the ground. Finally, under the blazing lights, before 100 piercing eyes, he broke down. "Someone hired me." "Who?" Rowena's voice was sharp as a blade. It was Charles Denton." A shocked murmur swept the hall. Charles Denton, her family's greatest rival, a shrewd magnate, locked in a decade-long feud with her father, and recently, as the Fairchilds prepared to sign a billion-dollar contract with an international music group to found an academy, he had openly vowed to ruin them. Rowena clenched her fists, eyes moving from the piano to Elijah. Her voice trembled just slightly. "If it weren't for you." Elijah bowed his head, his deep voice low and rough. "I just couldn't stand by while a precious piano was destroyed." What happened at the charity banquet that night spread like a shockwave through the upper class. In less than 48 hours after the saboteur was caught, lengthy articles about Charles Denton, once hailed as the untouchable Titan, flooded every front page. Public doubt vanished. Footage, testimony from the technician, even suspicious money transfers laid bare the disgraceful scheme he had orchestrated to ruin the National Treasure piano just to humiliate his rival. Under furious backlash, abandoned by shareholders, Denton's company teetered on the edge of collapse. Charles, who once stood at the peak of arrogance, was now only a name spoken with bitterness and disappointment. On the other side, the Fairchild estate no longer carried the stain of scandal but became a symbol of restoration and the honoring of true talent. In a small yet solemn press conference held in the family's side hall, the blonde young lady Rowena Fairchild stood beside the grand piano, and declared firmly, "My family extends our deepest apologies to Mr. Elijah Thompson, wrongly accused in this incident. He is not only an artist, but the one who preserved our honor and the trust of the public. Today we are honored to invite him to play a piece so we all remember this music, when it comes at the right moment, can save an entire family." Elijah stepped forward to a wave of applause, but his eyes were the same as always, calm, humble, and slightly out of place. He did not bow like a stage performer. He simply placed his hands on the piano, closed his eyes, and touched the first key. The sound rose like a soft breeze through the fingers of time. No grandeur, no showmanship, only pure sincerity. It was a piece he had written long ago, after his grandfather's passing. He named it Call of the Wood, and tonight it sang again, from the very piano that had nearly cost him everything. Rowena stood at the edge of the stage, silent. She tilted her head slightly, her once proud eyes now shimmering with genuine admiration. After the ceremony, when the guests had gone, she found Elijah in the garden. He stood alone, flipping through worn sheets of music. "When you played, I felt like even the air around us was moving," she said softly. Her voice, usually sharp with aristocratic polish, carried a touch of wistfulness. Elijah smiled faintly, but said nothing. She lingered a moment before speaking again. "I want to ask you something. Would you He turned to her, startled. "My family can help sponsor it. No strings attached. Only on one condition, that you hold on to why you first began, to teach music to children who have nothing, just as you once had nothing." He studied her for a long moment, as though hearing a new melody in someone who once unsettled him. At last he nodded. "Thank you." 3 months later, in an old southern quarter of the city, the small workshop Thompson and Wood officially opened its doors. The red brick house was restored, the faded wooden sign of his grandfather polished but unchanged. Inside, it was more than a repair shop. It held a small classroom, where Elijah taught poor children to feel music with their hearts. And that same afternoon, at the National Museum of Instruments, a special concert was held to honor the newly restored grand piano. Standing in the center, Elijah, in a plain white shirt, set his hands upon the familiar keys. He played his newest composition, untitled, yet filled with memories of his grandfather, the strike of hammers on strings, the scent of oil and wood, of the past and the present entwined. The final note faded. The hall rose in applause. Rowena, seated in the front row, said nothing. She simply smiled. A smile sincere and unguarded, gentle as the brush of a key, yet echoing long in the hearts of all who heard. Message. Some pieces of music don't need ornate melodies, only sincerity written into every note. Some lives don't need grand titles, only the courage to live by their truth, to carry real worth. Elijah, a black janitor unknown to the world, brought an entire hall into silence with his playing, not for its perfection, but for the soul carried in every key he touched. He didn't just reclaim his own dignity, he saved a piano, a family, and a fragile foundation of trust trembling in a prejudiced society. Music, when born from the heart, becomes a language beyond color, beyond status, beyond the approval of critics, because it is already an undeniable truth. And this story reminds us, never underestimate someone because of the skin they wear or the role they hold, for sometimes the person you look down on is the very one who knows how to save us all.